Welcome to this tutorial on how to draw a realistic dog's eye with me, Emily Rose. I'm a professional wildlife and pet portrait artist, and we're doing this tutorial in pastel pencils, which is my preferred medium. So what you'll need for this tutorial is some Pastelmat. I'm working on the card. You can see it's fairly thick. You can do this on the paper as well, which is great for practicing on. It's a little bit cheaper. I'm using the sand coloured card. You'll find all of these materials listed below. There's a free ebook for you to download with every step illustrated and written out for you. You might also want to get some crystal paper. This means that you can rest your hand over the top of your work and not smudge it. We of course then also need some pastel pencils, and once again you can find links to all of these down below. I'm not sponsored by any of these materials. This is simply what I like to use for my professional portraits, and you might be interested to know what they are. Lastly, I have a putty rubber, and that putty rubber is from FABER. I find that they last for absolutely years. So if you'd like to find out more about any of this, you can head over to my Gumroad channel. Down below you'll find timestamps if you want to jump ahead in the tutorial, and if you're ready to get going, let's make a start. Okay, so to get started, we are going to begin by picking out the darkest areas within the eye structure. So what I'm going to do is literally mark them out to begin with. This is a method known as massing. We are massing in the major shapes. This is how I would begin most of my drawings. It doesn't just need to be something like a dog or a dog's eye. If you've seen my tutorial on still life drawings, for example, you will know that this is how I begin many of my drawings. What it does is it distinguishes the most important shapes in your drawing from a very early stage, and what you'll see later on is how that brings your eye to life very quickly, but also gives you genuine realistic effects. So this is not one of those little silly techniques where I'm going to just put a little bit of colour here and there and suddenly it looks really fab and I won't tell you why. This is a genuinely trusted technique that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my reference photo, I'm picking out the darkest areas, and you can see I'm creating a map, and this is just so that I'm confident with where I'm using this black pencil. If you didn't feel particularly confident picking out the areas from your colour photograph, then all you'd need to do is turn your colour photograph to black and white and check your tones, which are the light and dark areas. And as I say, this works really well for any drawing that you want to do realistically. So we'll just speed up this process. Okay, now we've got the general areas mapped out. Using the same black pencil, I'm going to go straight in and fill them in. Now, something I see a lot of beginners make the mistake of, and even those who've been using pastels for a longer time, is they don't fill in the tooth of the card fully. So by the tooth, I simply mean the grain of the card, and if you don't fill it in, you'll see little grainy patches showing through, and they really disrupt the final texture of your subject. In this case, of course, we're trying to create something that's shiny, so we really do need to make sure that the tooth of the card is fully filled in. Of course, once again, if you're not fully sure on where you need to fill in and you're not completely confident, what you could do is do your drawing in several light layers and slowly go back in and reapply your pastel when you're completely sure that you've got it in the correct area. So I'm creating dust on the surface of the card. That's how I know that I've got enough pastel in. And what you'll see is around the edges of the very bright reflection here, for example, I'm just being a little bit softer, a little bit messy, and creating a hazy edge, which we will return to and sort out later on in the drawing. And I'll show you how we can properly get the lighter areas later on to join into these dark patches really nicely. We've got to create some different edges. Edges are extremely important in any realistic work, whether that is drawing or painting. You must pay attention to your edges. So I'm just putting in the shadow, the bottom of his iris. And again, I'm being a little bit softer with the pencil, moving the pencil in small circles to create a slightly hazy edge, but I'm still encouraging the pastel to mix into the card nicely for me. By creating this hazy edge, it's going to be much easier later on to join it into the subsequent layers. Okay, so that's the first layer in, that's just with the black. And no matter what medium you're using, you will want to start in this way by picking out the darkest areas. Right now I'm just taking a putty rubber and I'm just cleaning up, and I will do this in between quite a few stages, especially those where I'm pressing particularly hard and I'm producing quite a lot of pastel dust. Okay, so to start to get into the structure of our eye, there is something super important that you need to know. And this is something that not a lot of people teach, but what you need to know is the structure. So we have ball-like shape of the eye here, it's curving out. And because it's curving out and the way that the light's coming in, it's catching its brightest reflection just here. That's really quite obvious to know that the eyeball is ball-shaped. However, inside the eye, there are a multitude of structures, and one of them is the iris. And the iris here doesn't curve outwards, it curves inwards, it's scooped inwards. Because of that, the lighting is coming in, it's hitting our eyeball about here, but the iris is scooped the other way. It's going to catch the light down over here. Wherever that you find your brightest highlight, brightest reflection, you want to be looking directly opposite, and that is where you will find your iris reflection, because it's curving the other way to the eyeball. And thanks to that handy little tip, you'll now be able to work out the structure and the lighting for your eye, even if you have a particularly poor reference photo to be working from. So if your photo is quite flat and you've only got a very mild highlight, it doesn't matter, because you know that directly opposite the highlight is where your reflection for the iris is going to go, and you can give the eye a good glow and it will look realistic. So from here, I'm going to go in with a dark brown. This is the 177, your walnut brown. And once again, look how I'm using the pencil. I'm sweeping it in those circular oval motions to try and encourage things to blend together. So I'm just getting a little bit lighter here, and I'm going over and into the edges of the black. So what we're doing is we're stepping slowly from our darkest tone, which is black, slightly into the world of colour with this very dark brown, and I'm just encouraging them to mix together. When I encourage pastel to mix together, I not only move my pencil in these circular motions, but I also get a little bit lighter with the pencil as I travel into the area of different colour and tone. Here it's black, so that they start to mix, and this colour, in this case the brown, will fade out for us. So you can see I'm just going around the edges for now. We can pick up the black again and redefine it later, which is what I nearly always do. Remember that the iris reflection is going to be somewhere down here, so this side of the iris is going to be fairly dark. So I'm just going to add some more of this lovely walnut brown. I'm being a little bit lighter in the central area of the iris, because we will put some other colours in there, but we want it fairly dark so that we get a very rich eye. From there, I'm looking at my photo and I can see that there are some more of these sort of chocolate brown colours, and these are swirled in down near the third eyelid. So dogs have 3 eyelids, and the third eyelid is to help keep the eye obviously protected. It's an extra layer of protection, but it also sweeps tears over the eyeball. It's just quite clever, really. So I'm sweeping the pencil just to encourage that to mix gently into those edges. I'm lifting it every time it's leaving the card so that I get a very soft edge to that. And not forgetting the outside of the eye as we work, I'm again going to just introduce a little bit of this brown around his lid. And I will be adding grey into this later on. So you can see I'm allowing a bit of the grain of the card here to show through. I'm not pressing as hard as I did with the black in that first stage. But one of the important things about drawing eyes, and this doesn't just apply to dog eyes, but to get realistic eyes, is the eye socket. It's this structure surrounding your eyeball. If that structure isn't correct, your eyeball, no matter how fantastic it is, won't look right, because it can't sit inside the correct structure of the skull. So you have to create a good form around that eyeball. So I'm just looking for the areas where I've got this chocolate brown in my photograph, generally around the edges of the black. As the black slowly becomes lighter, we get this nice brown. I think some grey at the top here will also be good, but I will sweep a bit of the 177 in to start with. So getting lighter again, and this is how I draw any eye. I kind of go in with the first round of pencils and then I'll go back and add some details, but getting slightly lighter, I'll take the 283 now, and I'm going to start on the darker side of the eye. I'm not pressing too hard because this pencil will show up fairly easily against these very dark tones that we've got down. And again, I'm using that circular, slightly lazy oval motion here, just to mix it in to the 177, the dark brown that's already there. And you can see I'm putting it generally in the center of the iris. I'm not going too far over those dark edges. And again, over on the other side, I'm not going to press too hard over here. I'm definitely going to work it into the edges of that dark brown. We have some lighter colors that I'd like to get in, so I'm still going to leave a little gap in the middle. Continuing with the iris for now, take the 182, and I love this pencil, it's absolutely fantastic. And we're going to move from these reds into the yellows. This is again a little bit lighter. I'm going to work in the area that we've left completely naked of any pastel at the moment. And again, I'm swirling my pencil, so I'm getting these really soft transitions by doing that. And every time I'm going over an edge into another colour, I'm just getting a little bit lighter with my pencil so that they're mixing together very evenly. So this is definitely a core pastel technique that I would encourage you to practice. So I've created a nice glow and we're already getting a good feeling for light, but because I'm going to go a bit lighter in tone and colour than this pencil here, I'm also just going to add a little bit over on the right hand side, which you can see in the photograph. This can always be dulled back later if it's not quite right. To blow off that pastel dust, we've already got a good glow to the eye. Okay, so before we get much further, I'm just going to block in the area for the bright reflection, but we won't put in the white quite yet. So to start blocking in the area for the brightest reflection, I'm actually going to begin with this grey, which I often refer to as a mid-grey, the 273. It's sort of in the middle of black and white. And the reason you want to go for a grey before you reach for that white, and indeed a fairly dark grey, is because you can't put the white directly next to the black and expect it to look like a reflection on the eyeball. There will be a slight transition of tone between that bright white reflection and the deep black of the pupil and the shadow. So we have to respect that, and we have to just give it a slightly softer edge. Again, it comes back to that really important theme in any realistic work, which is your edges. So here, I'm being extremely light with the pencil and I'm swirling it around so that I'm just mixing this grey into the black. I will probably go and pick up the black later on and again swirl that into the edges of that dark grey. Before I get to the white, I'm going slightly lighter, but still in the realm of grey with the 230 and doing the exact same thing. So very light with the pencil, really don't need hardly any pressure for this. And just swirling that so that you're blending the pastel together. And this will give you a really nice realistic finish. So I'm going to leave the white for now because the white will get dirty as we draw. But just so that we have an idea how bright the white is, I'm just going to put a small patch in the middle. The main reason for that is it helps us see how bright we can take the remaining area of the iris. It gives us that gauge right from the darkest tone to our lightest tone in the drawing. Before we carry on with any of the iris, however, we need to block in the rest of the eye. That is what we're doing at this stage. We are blocking in all the key areas. So I'm going to pick up the 182 again. There are so many numbers and I often just spurt out a random number. And actually I'll be telling you to pick up a purple instead of a nice brown. So I've not pressed too hard in this area, but if you have a look at the photo, you can see a little bit of colour around the white of the eye, some of the veins. So this is just going to soften that edge. Again, we're coming back to that important key theme, our edges. So we're mostly concerned with creating soft edges in this piece. So I'm going right up to the black and again, swirling the pencil, I'm going slightly over the black to blend it slightly and soften it. So this is very controlled blending. You can see I haven't made that area particularly any bigger. I've just made it a lot softer so that that black edge is no longer so perfect and it's not therefore demanding too much of our attention either, which is the main reason for doing that. For the other side of the white of the eye. We haven't got as much colour, but if you look at your photo, it's not nearly as bright as that white. You can very easily get lost within a painting and you make the white of the eye bright white. It's never bright white, it's actually quite dull. So I'm going to go in with a pencil that is too dark to start with, and it's that mid grey, the 273 again. And just like with this brown that I've used in this section, I'm not going to press too hard, I'm just swirling it in so we get a nice shade over that whole area. So again, this is just blocking in our important shapes. Likewise, I'm just going to add a little bit of grey over in this reflection that we can see there, and put it slightly underneath the eye. These details can be returned to at the end of our drawing, of course. For the pink that we can see down here, I'm actually going to go in with this grey. We will be adding pink later, but the grey for now. If we go straight in with the pink, there'll be too much colour, too high in saturation, and it could become too bright as well, whereas the tone of this grey is quite appropriate for that area of the eye. So what we've done is we've blocked in all of the major shapes and tones for our eye. We have a really good structure to it. We know where the light's coming from, but there's nothing else added to it yet. There's no sort of cherry on the cake. So before we carry on with the eyeball itself, I'm going to use the 175, which is a warm dark grey. It's your sepia dark, and I'm going to use the pencil on the side like so. That gives me a really broad application area for the pastel, and it makes it quite easy to work with. And I'm going to shade in a lot of the eye socket that we can see, and we'll be adding lighter tones straight over the top of this, which will work really well. We're going to be adding the most detail, of course, to the eyeball itself, so we can create simple basic shapes around the eye for this study. It doesn't need to go into hordes of detail. So watch how I'm using the pencil. I'm sweeping it on and off the page. I move it before it hits the page, and then continue to move that pencil after it's left the page. As I get to the edges of my study, just to give it a nice finish, I'm getting a little bit lighter. I just give it a slightly hazy edge, which is quite a nice way to finish off any study that you do. While I'm here, I'm just going to take my black and use the pencil in exactly the same way to give it a little bit more structure. So we have the brow up here, which for this breed of dog is very close to our eyeball. So I just want to get some of that in, because as I've said, the structure of the eye socket is just as important as the drawing of the eyeball that you can do. And that goes for any mammal that you're drawing. It's extremely important, and it's often completely forgotten. And that just means that the eyeball has nothing to effectively sit inside of in your drawing. It kind of looks like it's been stuck onto the surface instead, and we lose a lot of depth, which is quite a shame, because actually putting in the structure of an eye socket is fairly easy. Okay, so we've reached the messy stage of your painting, and any drawing, any painting always goes through this stage. This is where you've got to stick with it, because the next stage really brings it to life very, very quickly. So we don't want to leave it at this stage for very long. So to start with, we're going to work back into the iris. That will give us some nice results really, really quickly. So I'm just going to take the 186. You could also use the 187, and I'm going to start over in the bright section of the iris. We don't want to be making this side too much brighter, so probably just leave that alone with any of these new pencils that we're picking up. You can see I'm putting in some shapes and I'm breaking them up to start alluding to the structure of the iris in there. So I'm allowing bits of the underpainting to show through. But what I'm then doing is I'm not pressing so hard with a pencil, and I'm going back over the top a couple of times. It's using the pencil as a blending tool just to soften those edges so that it shows that the light gently disappears and trails out into nothing. But I like to take it a little bit brighter than this. I'm using this pencil, the Ochre Light from CRETACOLOR. Now, you don't have to buy this pencil at all. You could use one of the other pencils that we flashed up on screen for you, such as the 184 from FABER Pastel. Now, being lighter, this will show up more easily. So once again, you need to be quite light with the pencil. And I appear to be drawing over it several times because yet again, I'm using the pencil as a blending tool. So I'm just being really light and helping to swirl those markings out. To even up the lighting all the way around the eye now, I'm going to go back in with the 182, the original pencil for our iris, and I'm just going to start on the edges of the bright area and slowly fade it out so that again we have this nice gradual disappearance of the light. So that's created a beautiful effect there. To fix up the rest of the eye, still leaving the highlight itself alone, we need to go back to a few of our other pencils. So again, I would do this for any drawing, block it in and then return to areas. So I'm picking up the black, and you should have a fairly good feeling for how to use the pencils quite lightly by now. So what I'm doing is I'm using it as a mixing tool by going round in lots of circles and just making that edge tidier. So I'm making sure that the blending is better by increasing the amount of pastel in that area, reducing the grain, and making the transition much harder to decipher. So you need to be very, very light with the pencil. I'm also looking at my reference photo and seeing any areas that could become a little bit darker. So with pastel, you can always make an area darker much more easily than you can take it lighter. So it's best to take your drawing lighter overall to begin with, and then just slowly start to work back into it with your darker pencils. And you can see that these shadows are almost melting away. They're so beautifully soft. So I'm going to do this all the way around those black areas, but I'm constantly looking at my reference photo to make sure that I'm working in the correct area. Now you'll notice on most mammals that the upper lid, just as it is on humans, is thicker than the bottom lid. So we can really afford to create quite a ledge here as the lid juts out. Obviously this will be easier to see when we go in with some lighter tones around the eye and start to pick out the light there. To help the transition a little bit more, I like to use a bit of that dark grey, the 175, that we have used around the eye, and I'm just going to put this in the darkest areas to give it an extra step before we get down to the dark grey. So that is of course mainly on the right hand side of the iris, and then just up at the top around that deep shadow. After that, we're carrying on through our list of pencils, going in with the 177 to yet again just help melt the shadows out. So once more, I'm not putting a lot of pressure at all through this pencil. I'm using it more as a blending tool. We have got a lot of pastel down now, so things should mix together for you quite easily. If you're not finding it's mixing together very well, you have probably not pressed hard enough with the first stages of this painting. So you'll just want to go back through and press harder. Make sure you can't see the grain of the card showing through. Okay, so let's work on the eyeball, the white of the eye that we can see. I'm going to go in with the 273, and once more, as is a theme, I'm not going to start off by pressing too hard. Instead, I'm sweeping the pencil on and off. We can add more layers, but by sweeping it on and off, I'm able to trail it out with a lot of control, so that as we get to these slightly duller areas up at the top, which you can clearly see in the photograph, I can just let this light grey completely disappear. We don't need any of it there. And while we've got this pencil, we can pick out the highlights that we can see these reflections near the third eyelid. Now you can see I'm allowing a lot of the dark tones, the underpainting, to show through. You must allow that to happen for these little bits to glint out. If you add too much of this pencil, we won't have anything left to contrast it and it won't work. For the pink down by the tear duct, I'm using the 191. We've already got a base of the grey, which is absolutely key because this pencil is quite strong. So yet again, I'm almost floating the pencil over the page and being that light with it. We don't want to add too much saturation down here in the eye. This is the only area of pink in the whole drawing, so it will look particularly intense because it's going to be contrasted by the different colours anyway. So I've added a glaze there. A glaze is when you can still see the tone or the colour underneath it. And once again, I'm just going to pick up that light grey and add a little highlight along there as well. So the eyeball itself is finished. We of course need to add the reflection in, but that's going in at the end so that we don't have to come back and touch that bit up. So we can add in a little bit of light going around the eye just to finish off this study. I'm going to start with the 273 and I'm just going to begin in the brighter areas over here. Now what you'll notice is the skin around the eye, the eyelids, and this is true on pretty much any breed of dog, so it really does apply to you no matter what you are drawing. You need to allow little bits of the underpainting again to show through. We need to build up a little bit of texture. So I like to put small random marks down. Again, I then put my pencil over the top more lightly to help them blend in. And then, sort of like Tetris, I'll fit in some other little shapes. Now do remember that of course the eyelid is curved, so some of these shapes as I come around, they are going to have a slight curve to them, but I'm still allowing bits of the darker tone to show through. Also note that I don't take them right up to the eyeball itself. There is always a dark line between the eyeball and these lighter colours, again because the eyelid is curving, and you can really see that as we come further down that the dark ledge, if you like, gets thicker and thicker. So do pay attention to that and move where you are putting these lighter marks. You really need to look at your photo. So I'm blending over the top of these and really softening them out. And I'm going to carry on around, much the same way, but over here we can see more skin exposed and there is a little bit more light, so we will also be adding that in too. So I'm just going to turn my painting to get a good angle and just lightly start to put some of this grey coming further out over the underpainting. Now I'm getting more and more general with my marks, a little bit broader, a little bit softer, because I'm allowing my painting to fade off. This is of course a study. Once again, think about the structure as you come up to the top. Remember what I said, the top lid is really quite thick and we're seeing the underside of that lid. So the reflections are going to be fairly slim right on the top lid here. And we get a very thick ridge underneath, a nice deep eyelid and nice deep shadow as well. It makes sense of the shadow that we've drawn in. Of course, as we come further round, because of the change in perspective and also the lid folding over, we can see much more of these brighter areas, these reflections over the skin. They start to get a little bit softer. So you always need to think of them fanning out here. This is where we start to see that small top lid. So these marks are all appearing roughly from this crease and getting broader, just slightly broader as they come over the top of the eyeball. So you can see how the shapes are curving. They must curve because of course they are going over the top of the spherical shape. So it's really important that you're really thinking about every mark that you put down. It's all going to affect the eye, even though the eye itself is pretty much finished, apart from of course that lovely bright reflection. Now if I was doing this properly as a full portrait, then I would be starting to bring in some other colours at this point, colours that I'd probably be using elsewhere in the dog. But as this is a simple study of just the eye, I'm going to carry on with the light grey. The other colours that I would have used, if you're interested, are things like the Bister and the 180. They're both browns, fairly desaturated, and it'd just be starting to bring in a little bit more colour. This dog has some light kind of honey browns peppered through its coat here and there, and we can see some of them in the skin. So using my finger, I'm just dabbing and slowly stroking over the top, especially around the edges. Again, it's helping to fade it out because I want a nice soft finish to the edge of this study. Once more, you need to think about your marks here. We can really see the spherical shape around this side of the eye where the eyeball is bulging out of the skull. So this is from a French bulldog, quite a young one. So of course their eyes really do bulge out of their heads, which is why we're seeing a lot of that kind of bulbous shape around this side. Skin is completely finished. Let's go in with the 230. This is your light grey, and I'm going to be quite selective. You need to be selective as you get lighter, and this is a whole general rule about drawing, especially drawing realistically. You need to start to really think about where is lighter so that you make sure that these brightest areas really pack a punch and they pull those areas forward. If you start to put this too much over the whole drawing, then you'll actually flatten it, because once again you're going to lose that contrast that we currently have. So I'm looking for the really sparkling bright areas of reflection on the skin while I'm doing this, and I'm just going over the top, yet again putting in a strong mark and then sweeping the pencil back over it until it becomes much softer. It's just a few on this top lid, but not very many. And while we've still got this pencil, we can see that the water in the eye is catching the light just on the edge. So I'm going to use this pencil, and you will need to press nice and hard because there's lots of pastel down, and just pop that in. I will be adding a bit of white to this as well. But we want the brightest area to remain, the reflection over the top of that pupil. So for the white, I've chosen the Caran d'Ache 901. You don't need to get this, you can use the FABER-CASTELL 101. I just quite like using the Caran d'Ache for the very bright areas. It is so soft that it really packs a punch, whereas the FABER-CASTELL is a little bit harder, and I find that although it still does an absolutely sterling job, it doesn't put the white down quite so readily and thickly as you can with the Caran d'Ache. So we'll come back to that in just a second. I'm going to put a small slither, as I said, at the bottom of the eye. Give it a good tap off. And then I'm very carefully just going to go in, finishing touch. These things really make a difference. And go around with the light grey, round the edge of that white to get it nice and soft, so it really glows out. Also going to add a little bit more of the yellow. Now we've got that white in, you can really see how bright that reflection is, and by contrast I think this can come up a little bit brighter as well. So there it is, how to draw a realistic dog's eye in pastel pencils. So we've really covered the very important techniques that you need for realism here, and that is blocking in your shadows to start with. That goes for any medium, whether that is with pencil or paints, and then starting to work from those darkest tones gradually towards your lighter tones, thinking about your edges. How soft is an edge? How hard is an edge? That is what's going to make the biggest difference to your work, even if you are a beginner. If you'd like to find out more from me, I have plenty of tutorials over on Gumroad. They go much more in depth, and they include an entire project so that you're left with not just an eye, but the whole subject. I am also going to be recording an in-depth tutorial for how I do pet portraits, which will be going up on Gumroad at some point, but currently there are plenty of subjects such as leopards or fighter fish, hares. There's absolutely all sorts on there. I really hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, please comment below. I'd love to know what you think, and if you've got any suggestions for further videos, and don't forget to give this a nice thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy drawing.